Money FM 89.3, the best of the afternoon update. The Afternoon Update with Lynlee Foo.
Money FM 89.3. Welcome to Industry Insight. I'm Lynlee. Now, around the world, institutions are weighing how far to go with digital assets and whether tokenization of real-world assets like bonds, real estate and funds can move from concept to genuine adoption. Singapore has been positioning itself as a hub thanks to its financial depth and reputation for regulatory clarity. And this week, that discussion is in the spotlight as the city plays host to the inaugural Digital Assets Summit 2025. Joining me is Danny Chong, co-chairman of the Digital Assets Association Singapore, to explore what it will take for tokenization to move from promise to practice. Welcome, Danny.
Hi, Lynlee. Thanks for having me.
Now, Danny, let's start with where the industry really stands. Tokenization pilots, they've been around for years, but in your view, what does genuine institutional adoption actually look like?
So institutional adoption has definitely moved from exploration to implementation. We see banks, asset managers, corporates using tokenization for bonds, funds, and payments. So this growth in custody solutions and compliance frameworks shows that institutions aren't just testing, they are building. We have quite a few adoption examples. For example, JP Morgan's Onyx processed over $1 trillion in tokenized repo trades. In Singapore, MAS Project Guardian with DBS, JP Morgan, and also SPI had piloted tokenized bonds. And just last month, DBS has also issued tokenized structured notes on Ethereum, and they lowered the minimum entry from $100,000 to $1,000, distributed via platforms like DJFT and ADDX. So if I can put a description to it, today adoption is no longer about when it will happen, but how to scale it safely and profitably. So it's no longer a theory, right? Basically, institutional adoption of digital assets. It's already visible how the major banks and funds are tokenizing products and offering digital custody. So yeah, we should definitely be scaling ahead from what I see in terms of safety and compliance to take it to the next level.
I suppose the shift we're waiting for is when the term tokenized, right, stops being a novelty label and just becomes finance as usual.
Yeah, for sure. Tokenized is a word that people always try to understand it as just crypto. But tokenization is beyond putting it on blockchain, and the benefit it brings about is a lot more than just what we can see on the surface now.
Okay. Singapore's often described as having regulatory clarity, others don't. How does that translate into a real advantage for institutions deciding where to put their capital?
So Singapore's regulatory clarity stands out. We obviously have the Payment Service Act, the PSA, and the Financial Service and Markets Act, FSMA, to provide clear licensing, what to do, and guidelines. I think that's the reason why the likes of Coinbase, Circle, Ripple, Crypto.com, and many others set up HQs here. I mean, we also see Circle launching the USDC stablecoin framework under MAS oversight. So what firms want to know is the rules up front. Unlike in some jurisdictions, uncertainty actually deters capital from flowing in. Singapore is in the right space. I would say it's moving in the right pace as well, balancing innovation with investor protection, making it attractive for global institutions. That's why, like as mentioned, that all the regional and global HQs are set up here. So yeah, we definitely have to continue pushing onwards with the transparency, with showing how risks are managed here. Singapore is not just now well known as a digital assets hub, but obviously it was first known as a financial hub. So the risk needs to be managed. At the same time, innovation is encouraged.
I find it quite interesting because instead of loosening the rules, Singapore is showing that certainty itself can attract investment.
It is very important. Like all businesses, if you want to look at it, whether it's digital assets or traditional businesses, certainty does give confidence to investors and for businesses to want to work with you. Knowing the rules lets them know how the game is being played, and they can be sure of the outcome and the investment returns.
Even so, we know many institutions are still cautious. So from your conversations, what's keeping them on the sidelines?
In terms of investing, I guess a lot of people will be asking what actually is tokenization? What are the key challenges? There's quite a few things to want to invest into this space. Why? Custody and valuation standards is not something that's well crafted. So you want clear rules, you want how things are valued. It needs a big, consistent global framework to come about. And today, we do not have that. It's very well established for finance, but for digital assets, it is still growing, and it's ongoing efforts by private institutions and also government to actually make this work. It is still happening. Also, there is the worry of like whether liquidity is sufficient. There's obviously liquidity fragmentation. Assets can be tokenized, but secondary market debt is still thin. Without the secondary market to kind of support this tokenization market, it's very hard for it to flourish as well. We also need regulatory harmonization, whereas I think this part is already improving, but obviously there are still rules that differ across jurisdiction, and this will definitely slow cross-border flows. This is what we need more and more moving forward, which is obviously regulators aligning with each other and working with each other on making this flow process works better. Last but not least, if I can add, it's basically education and trust. A lot of people, many still need to know about how tokenization fits with the existing structure. Something to share. I was just recently speaking to someone from our neighboring country, and the country obviously is a non-deliverable currency where the currency is under capital control. So the country is pushing very much. A lot of the individuals, even some of the institutions are pushing for so-called stable coin of a local currency. And they say that this is the way that will make it work better because this is how it works for US dollar. But I think they are having the correct solution and solving the wrong problem, because the problem that is in existence is that there is capital control for a reason. The government would like to have that capital control, and you not solving that capital control portion, even if you have a stablecoin solution, it will not help. It will not help. So you need to solve the innate problem before you can have a stablecoin solution to help with it.
Now, speaking of which, one word that comes up a lot is interoperability. So how big of a hurdle is it to get tokenized assets in Singapore to talk to other markets?
I think interoperability is something that we need to work out, both not just from a technical perspective, but also from regulatory perspective and also from the rules of engagement. This is actually one of the reasons why we have the Digital Asset Association. I think we are also definitely trying to be the catalyst for industry standard and collaboration. So we want to have more working together, we want to have interoperability. We definitely need organization, we definitely need individuals and also institutions to come together to share what is a common standard and framework.
We often frame this as a banking or investment story, but could tokenization also change how companies outside finance, say in real estate or supply chains, operate?
Definitely. So first of all, you need to look at how each of the country actually operates real estate and other kind of like non-financial products. So in Singapore, I would say that if you try to tokenize property, you first have to know what are the rules with regards to private residential and also commercial property. So with that, tokenization takes on a level of complexity, whether it can be done properly under the existing rules and regulation on purchasing of property. So if you can solve that, then definitely you will be able to attract more investment. But at the same time, the rules around how you buy residential property and all this are set in for a reason. And you do not want to have tokenization of so-called property to circumvent those rules and regulations. Maybe if you're trying to do tokenization of commercial properties, as in how a commercial REIT might look like, but you do not want it to have the cumbersome of doing a very REIT with a lot of so-called legal docs and, like step by step to make this happen. You can do it on a smaller scale in terms of a smaller set of properties and also working with fewer individuals and basically agreed upon legal documents. I think that's fine. If I also have to say, it is quite important to know that there is tokenization, but the importance of it all is also how do you tie in tokenization of the real world asset with the token that you have. That is also something that people often ignore. The tie-in between the real asset and the token has to be very binded strongly.
Danny, Singapore isn't the only one positioning itself, though. Hong Kong, Japan, even South Korea are making big moves in digital assets. How does Singapore differentiate itself?
Singapore will likely remain a leading hub in Asia, I think, alongside Hong Kong and the likes of Japan. As I mentioned earlier, I think the legal clarity, the regulatory guidelines is actually very helpful. So whereas there has been reports of certain departures of some institutions, but at the same time, we see new ones that's coming in. And also, we also see that the kind of like partners and institutions that we have here for already here is basically edging themselves for the longer term. So we should expect the growth in tokenized funds, in green finance, in RWA, and obviously in structured products or so-called crypto or digital assets. I think that's kind of like what we will be seeing flourish in Singapore. Yeah, it is also quite interesting to note that why I mentioned the real assets is that it has been reported by Boston Consulting Group that it is likely to be a 16 trillion market by 2030.
Wow.
Yes.
Now, from where I stand, I see Singapore's strategy as being cautious, less about speed, but more about building foundations others might actually adopt.
I would say Singapore's emphasis is on responsible innovation positioning. So this is how it's going to lead in a global standard setting. We have seen a country that was veering towards digital assets and after that veering away and coming back. But I think Singapore has maintained its stance in moving forward with digital assets. It has always been supportive and listening to the ground on what's needed to be making changes to somehow conform it to a regulatory structure, but at the same time be business positive.
And if we fast forward 3 years, what would success look like for Singapore in this space?
That's a very good question. The fast forward in this space, we will definitely see Singapore remaining in top position, as I mentioned, along Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan. It could also be the leading digital asset hub for the world. Yeah. Why I would say it is that it has crafted itself not just as performing on the digital asset side, but it has tied in nicely with the financial industry in totality. So this is what is important. We want to achieve digital assets growth, but at the same time, we need to know how to convert it into the real world. And I think Singapore is straddling that very well. If we are focusing on green finance, tokenized funds and RWA, it seems natural that Singapore takes pole position in the next couple of years to come.
Okay, and global investors, I'm sure, are already beginning to look to Singapore as the benchmark for institutional-grade digital assets.
Definitely. Even on the ground, we are seeing a lot more talks between institutions, even a lot more involvement, inquiry from overseas, both private and government bodies on how to work together with Singapore institutions. I think that's clearly a standout to say that Singapore's reputation and solid foundation and way moving forward for digital asset has attract kind of like the needed partnership from a global perspective.
Sounds fantastic, placing Singapore not just in the conversation, but in the driver's seat of how the digital asset economy will be taking shape. Thank you so much, Danny, for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, Lynlee, and thanks for having me.
Danny Chong, co-chairman of the Digital Assets Association Singapore, on how Singapore could turn regulatory clarity into capital flows as the city plays host to the inaugural Digital Assets Summit. You've been listening to Industry Insight on Money FM 89.3. I'm Lynlee.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.